The psychological transformation happening inside your avoidant has reached a tipping point that's going to make your next interaction unlike anything you've experienced with them before. All their internal processing, regret, and newfound self-awareness has created a completely different person who's preparing to show up in ways that will catch you completely off guard. They're done playing games, done hiding behind walls, and ready to engage with a level of authenticity that's going to shock you. They're going to be disarmingly honest. The next conversation will feature a level of emotional transparency that's completely opposite to their usual mysterious, guarded communication style. They're prepared to answer questions they've always deflected, share feelings they've always hidden, and admit to patterns they've always denied. This honesty will feel almost jarring after their typical emotional evasiveness. They're planning to confess their genuine feelings about you, acknowledge their destructive patterns without making excuses, and take full accountability for how their behavior affected you and the relationship. This radical honesty represents their decision that vulnerability with you is less scary than continuing to hide and potentially losing you forever. The shocking part will be how specific and detailed their honesty becomes. They're prepared to explain their psychological processes, admit to their manipulation tactics, and reveal thoughts and feelings they've never shared with anyone. Their transparency will be so complete, it might feel overwhelming. They're going to pursue rather than retreat. Instead of their usual pattern of creating distance when things get emotionally intense, they're planning to lean into the conversation with focus and presence that's completely uncharacteristic. They'll be asking questions about your feelings, expressing genuine interest in your thoughts, and actively working to understand your perspective rather than deflecting or withdrawing. This pursuit energy will be the opposite of their typical dynamic, where they make you do all the emotional work while they remain passive and unavailable. They're prepared to be the one driving emotional connection and maintaining conversational momentum, rather than leaving that responsibility to you. The role reversal will be startling because you're used to them shutting down or becoming distant when conversations get real. This time they're planning to stay present and engaged no matter how vulnerable or intense the interaction becomes. They're going to take full accountability. The conversation will include genuine apologies without excuses, defenses, or attempts to minimize their behavior. They're prepared to acknowledge specific ways they hurt you, validate your experiences of their treatment, and take complete responsibility for the pain their patterns caused. This accountability will extend beyond general admissions to specific incidents where they chose their comfort over your feelings, specific times they manipulated situations to maintain control, and specific moments where they recognized they were hurting you, but continued their destructive behavior anyway. The shocking aspect will be their willingness to center your experience rather than their intentions, to focus on the impact of their behavior rather than their reasons for it, and to validate your reactions without trying to manage or control how you respond to their admissions. They're going to demonstrate changed priorities. The conversation will reveal that their entire value system has shifted from prioritizing their emotional safety to prioritizing your well-being and the health of your connection. They'll be making it clear through their words and energy that you've become more important to them than their defensive patterns. This priority shift will be evident in their willingness to have difficult conversations they've always avoided, to address issues they've always deflected, and to engage with emotional topics that typically trigger their withdrawal responses. They're choosing connection over comfort for the first time. The evidence of changed priorities will shock you, because it represents the complete opposite of their previous approach, where they consistently chose their psychological safety over relationship health and your emotional needs. They're going to express genuine vulnerability. Instead of their usual emotional armor, they're planning to show up without defenses in ways that will reveal their authentic fears, needs, and desires. This vulnerability will include admitting how much they need you, how scared they are of losing you, and how much their defensive patterns have cost them. This genuine vulnerability will be shocking because it's the exact opposite of their typical presentation as someone who doesn't need anyone or anything. They're prepared to reveal their emotional dependency, their fears about relationships, and their genuine terror about being hurt or abandoned. The vulnerability will extend to sharing their internal experience of loving you, how overwhelming their feelings have been, how their defensive responses were attempts to manage that overwhelming love, and how much their patterns have tortured them, as well as you. They're going to make concrete commitments. The conversation will include specific, actionable commitments to behavioral changes, rather than vague promises about doing better. They're prepared to outline exactly what they're going to do differently, and how they plan to maintain those changes over time. These commitments will be detailed and practical rather than emotional and abstract. They'll address specific patterns you've identified as problematic, specific needs you've expressed that weren't met, and specific ways they plan to show up differently in ongoing interactions. The shocking aspect will be their willingness to be held accountable for these commitments and their openness to feedback about whether they're following through on their promises. They're choosing accountability over their usual avoidance of responsibility. They're going to fight for the relationship, instead of their typical passive approach where they let you do all the work to maintain connection. They're planning to actively fight for what you have together. This will include expressing clearly that they want to rebuild what was damaged and outlining their vision for how things could be different. This fighting spirit will be completely opposite to their usual stance of letting relationships drift or end, rather than working to repair problems. They're prepared to be the one pushing for resolution, healing, and forward movement, rather than accepting defeat or distance. The energy will be completely different. What will be most shocking is the completely different energy they bring to the interaction. Present instead of distracted, engaged instead of detached, focused on you instead of focused on their escape routes. They're showing up as someone who wants to be there, rather than someone who's tolerating the conversation. The next time you talk to them will be interesting because they're planning to show up as the complete opposite of every avoidant pattern you've experienced from them, revealing someone who's been transformed by the possibility of losing you into someone capable of fighting for love.